It's February 10, 2023. We're in Lancaster, Pennsylvania for the annual gathering of Mennonite Disaster Service. I'm Gloria Nussbaum, and I'm talking with
Denis Sabourin
from
Winnipeg, Manitoba.
How did you first learn of or hear about Mennonite Disaster Service?
I learned through MDS a Sunday morning when men were on stage at our church, and they were announcing a trip to High River, Alberta, to repair homes after a flood. And that was my first exposure to Mennonite Disaster Service. That's in 2015.
When you heard about it, were you immediately interested, or how did that process happen for you?
I was new at faith at that time. So I had left faith in my late teens and then decided to come back in my late 50s. And that was my first trip back into a church for 40 years. And soon after that, I met these men that were traveling across the country. So I was in the process of being all in a church this time. I'd volunteered many other places in the church. I served coffee, I was a greeter, I was an usher, I was anything I could do to help. But this one really caught my attention, traveling across the country, which is something I'd like to do. And so I thought, well, let's try this. Let's get further out of my comfort zone and join these men for a week.
So tell me about that first experience.
Well, it is 8 or 9 years ago, but it was traveling across the country in a van with 4 other Christian men after 40 years of not believing in anything. It was an eye-opening experience. They were all very accepting of me, and they all guided me and answered my questions. The work was very rewarding, and I'm not a skilled tradesman, but I did find work that I was able to do and felt very at ease and at home with other people that were much more experienced at that than I was. It was completely different than anything I'd ever done before. Eat, sleep, and work with Christians, and they were singing and praying, and it's something that was like another planet for me the first time I was there.
And what was the disaster that you were actually...
It was a flood in High River, Alberta, where the river just broke bank and flooded part of the town. So we were repairing homes. And by the time I got there, it was mostly dry, but we were redoing some flooring and some walls, some drywall, and a little bit of painting, the finishing work.
And for how long was this going to be?
The project had started about a year earlier, and I think it ended a few months after, so I think it was about a 2-year project, and I was halfway through it.
Do you remember specifically anything from that first experience, and then go on and tell me some other stories of places you've been?
The following year, there were no trips announced on stage at my church, and I really wanted to do this again. So I called MDS Canada office in Winnipeg and spoke to Evelyn, and she explained how to plan my own trip. So I became the organizer of 17 trips since then at our church, which is a church contact person, which is an official position with MDS. So I discovered that I have a knack for tapping people on the shoulder and piquing people's interest in these through my experience of finding God at that moment, finding out that this is the way I wanted to serve, that maybe ushering and greeting wasn't for me, and serving coffee. So we were in Detroit twice the following year, which are trips that I coordinated. And then since then we've been to Texas, to Louisiana, to California, and then many places in Canada, 3 or 4 different places in British Columbia. Recently, in November, we came back from Paradise, California. But I've also done Puerto Rico and Saipan for 2 weeks. And now I'm beginning to think about, in semi-retirement, having more time to do perhaps long-term. So I did a long-term last summer in Monty Lake, where I was a crew leader for 4 weeks. And this summer I'll probably be an office manager in the Eastern Canada site in Cape Breton, Glace Bay, where they're repairing after a hurricane.
So not only do you have a specific role with MDS as a church representative, but you actually go out and do the work.
I do. I really enjoy. Many CCPs plan the trips but don't always attend. I've always attended the trips that I coordinated, that I planned. Because it's also a love of mine, but I discovered that I have the gift of recruiting as well. And that's always a joy, and our church loves to do these things together, where you don't need to be in a group to go to MDS. You can just sign up on the volunteer matrix and go. But we enjoy being 8 people or 12 people or 14 people flying to Saipan, all from the same church. Since 2015, we've had over 120 volunteers, even with the 2-year hiatus over the pandemic. So say in 6 years we had 120 volunteers, which is unheard of in many, across Canada. And I think our last total was about 150 weeks of serving just from volunteers from our church.
Is it a bit unique that your groups are usually from your church, but when you go, I assume that there are groups from other churches then that you meet up with and work together?
Yes, there are always other volunteers from other places, but there's also leaders. The leadership is there waiting for us. So the project directors, the cooks, the office managers, and oftentimes the crew leaders are already there too for their long term. Most of my trips have been 1 or 2 weeks at a time, except lately. So it is unusual, but that's how we do it at the Meeting Place Church in Winnipeg.
You've mentioned Saipan. Tell me a bit about that. I mean, that's a place that we don't even think about.
No, and the Marianas Island chain.
And maybe specifically tell us where that is.
Well, it's in the South Pacific. Many Americans know where Guam is because of the history of Guam. So it's about an hour's flight north of Guam, a small Pacific island, which in itself has a lot of history. As you're flying into Saipan, you fly over an island called Tinian. Tinian is the air base where the Enola Gay took off from. So these islands were all invaded by the Japanese, but when they were liberated, they used the islands as air bases to bomb Tokyo and Nagasaki. So there's a lot of history there, and I'm kind of a history buff, so this was also an interest of mine. And when I heard about this trip and that FEMA was helping out with the funding, I said, we have to be in. So we found 13 other people in church to join me for 2 weeks there.
And again, what was the disaster?
The disaster was a typhoon, so we were replacing roofs that flew off the houses. And, just general hurricane or typhoon damage on a very small island, mostly local people in very small cinder block homes with metal roofs, or sheet metal roofs that flew off. So there was a lot of that work going on.
I think it's safe to say that a big piece of what works and what makes MDS special is relationships. Could you talk a bit about in Saipan or other places where the people for whom you were rebuilding, how did you interact with them?
Yeah, that's a very important part of it. Since I'm not a construction person, I'm not a business owner, I'm not a house builder, I love to put down the hammer and listen to stories when I'm there. And MDS encourages us to do that. And so I take that opportunity to speak to the homeowners whenever they're there. Often they're not. They had to leave and go elsewhere during reconstruction. But when they are there, it's always such a pleasure to speak with them and to listen to their experience of being wakened in the middle of the night when the water was flooding their living room, or having to leave when their roof fell off their house. And so they all have stories, too many to tell, but they're all stories of feeling abandoned by the local governments. So when the Mennonites come to town, and we've heard this often, even in newspaper articles and on the news, when people speak of the Mennonites coming, it's a big thing. A lot of organizations come in and then leave, but we come in and then we stay for a year or two to rebuild afterwards. So that makes us special that way, in my mind.
Are there 1 or 2 people that kind of stand out in your years of working with MDS that immediately come to mind?
Many of the leaders of MDS have influenced me quite a bit. The first person I met is Walter Wiebe. He was a project director or a crew leader in High River, and then I keep bumping into him 7 years later, 8 years later. He was in Princeton, British Columbia. So it's always nice to see people that you've met along the road, and for me it's especially important because some of those people guided me spiritually as well. And they're almost all Mennonites, and I was born and raised in a Catholic family, even though I left faith. So the Anabaptist lifestyle is something that I'm just now discovering. And when I moved to Winnipeg in 1995, I didn't know what a Mennonite was. A Mennonite was a sausage for me, and the Amish was furniture. I had no idea what Anabaptist or the Mennonite lifestyle was. So meeting and working and staying with Mennonites every time I go on a trip is enlightening. And singing with them in the morning, I know, the love of singing, the love of praising and worshiping is something I love to do with people that have that in their hearts to do. So
I was going to ask what gives you joy, but you may have just explained that.
Yes, I am surprisingly a relational person. And I say surprisingly because I didn't know I was. Most of my career as a cartographer, it was always business related, always technical, always deadlines and meetings, and there was no growth as far as I'm concerned anywhere until I started attending MDS, and that led everything I've been doing since 2015 seems to be a stepping stone into another further stretch out of my comfort zone. Now I'm facility manager in a church, so I have the keys to the church.
Literally,
where 10 years ago I didn't believe in God. I say I didn't believe in God. I suppose you can call me an agnostic. I knew there was something, but I didn't believe in church. I didn't believe in religion. I remember many times in my life when I was approached by someone who could have changed my life, but I turned away from it. So my story is of the lost sheep, and always being frightened as soon as I saw him coming to get me. I was frightened, and then I panicked, and I didn't allow to be brought back until I was on stage that morning. And that's when Jesus found me disguised as MDS, I think. And those men on stage were sent, I believe, to bring me back.
Well, one of the purposes of this project is to encourage others to get involved. And I think one of the challenges with MDS and many others is moving from one generation to the next to get maybe younger people involved. What would you say to maybe encourage, people of any age, but maybe especially younger people, to check us out and get involved?
We've had no problems getting young people involved in our church. I'm not a youth person or youth leader by any stretch, but we have taken youth groups out. We had a week in Princeton, a week in Monty Lake last year, where we took 12 high school youth, and we had a great time. And I'm very confident about the future, a very promising future with MDS. We have very young people here. We have young people on staff in Manitoba office. So, I don't have a lot of experience recruiting youth, but from what I see, it doesn't take much to talk youth into traveling across the country to help pick up debris after a flood. We found that quite easy because we let them be themselves as well. They come and they play together, they dance together, they sing together, and they find it as rewarding as I do planning these trips for them. That's
very encouraging.
Yeah. We're very proud of our children and our youth, especially at the Meeting Place Church in Winnipeg. And, that's where I've done all of my work, so I can't really compare other churches. But when we are introduced, I am introduced as the top recruiter in Canada. And that's only because of the type of people in my church. So it's hard to compare because I've done nothing else but.
Anything else that you'd like to share as we're wrapping up here?
Yeah, no, other than just what I said, MDS changes lives, not only of the homeowners and of the volunteers, but MDS changes lives of everyone I met along the way, and I didn't recognize seed planting before, but I see it now. I'm going to speak tomorrow about a bus driver who asked us where we were going, or a barista in a coffee shop. So, what neighbor of mine are you helping today? We used to get these questions. Or, the border security guard. Where are you going today? What are you going to do in the United States today or next? Why are you going to California? The hotel clerk, why are you here this week? Everyone who asks us now, I believe we changed their lives. And it's very rewarding knowing that I'm part of MDS now, and MDS was sent to get me, and now why am I being sent? Why am I being called to do this 3 or 4 times a year now and planning on a future with MDS in my retirement? It's life-changing.
Denis, thank you so much for taking some time to share a bit with me.
Well, thank you.